Our gospel lesson this morning as we continue our Lenten journey through the life of Christ is Matthew chapter 4, verses 1 through 10. This follows immediately after Jesus' baptism. Then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. He fasted 40 days and 40 nights, and afterward he was famished. The tempter came and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread." But Jesus answered, "It is written, one does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God." Then the devil took Jesus to the holy city and placed him on the pinnacle of the temple, saying to him, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you, and on their hands they will bear you up, so that you will not dash your foot against a stone." Jesus said to him, "Again, it is written, do not put the Lord your God to the test." Again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. And he said to him, "All these I will give you if you will fall down and worship me." Jesus said to him, "Away with you, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve only him." Before we begin, first let me thank Marty to be here for us as Bob and Linda are celebrating their anniversary in Cozumel. I want to express my thanks for Meredith, who filled in on very short notice when I came down with the flu, and then served while I was in Cleveland with Jennifer and Bill and Denise, my in-law family, as we mourned the death of our mother, Penny. Thank you for your concerns, and we appreciate the love that you have showered upon us at this time. Food, fame, fortune. There is nothing wrong with wanting any or all of these. Fame may well mean that we have lived a productive and compassionate life. And food, we need food to live. And fortune offers the opportunity for our generosity to make a real difference. But sometimes food, fame, and fortune may mean something entirely different. The story which we just heard read is a Job-like story, where the prosecuting attorney from the heavenly court goes down to visit trouble on one who is deemed to having been faithful by God. Here, the accuser puts Jesus to the test. Whereas Job had once had all the food, all the fame, all the fortune a human could desire, Jesus has none of it. Job, we know, lost it all, spent his days dressed in the dust of ashes of mourning. Jesus has spent 40 days and 40 nights fasting, dressed in the dust of desert and desertion. But for Jesus, there is much more at stake. It seems to me that it is when we are at our weakest that we are most susceptible to making the wrong choices. When we are most apt to put our wants before others' needs. When even the innocent things can serve as traps and trips. It is when we are at our weakest that we are prone to have tunnel vision, when our focus never includes the big picture, perceiving the consequences inevitable because of our actions. All that we see is right in front of us. All that we want is for someone to fix it. Jesus must have been hungry. A 40-day fast. We have trouble with a 40-minute fast. So what's the big deal? It's just some stones. How can it be a bad thing to have some bread to break the fast? Whether Jesus knew it or not, the prosecuting attorney seems to know that it is possible for Jesus to turn stones into bread. What if he looked at the bigger picture? What if Jesus could turn stones into bread for himself? Doesn't that mean he could turn stones into bread and feed the world? Could end world hungry? Wouldn't that be wonderful? Then wouldn't that be wonderful? Now. But what would be the consequences for Jesus, for the world, if he were to do that good thing? It would change him, wouldn't it? It would redefine him in a manner that cheapened his good deeds. Yes, later he would turn 2 loaves of bread and 5 fish into a feast for thousands. So what's the big deal now? Why not do this small little thing? Yesterday we celebrated the life of Charlie Boy Clark. One of the stories we heard was how much of a stickler Charlie was for doing the right things and doing things right. In his business, it was his name that was on the line. It was his reputation that would be sullied by shoddy craftsmanship. So even though an error had been made in a place where no one would ever see it, even though the mistake would not do any structural damage, Charlie demanded of his employees that it be done over and that it be done right. Why? Because he was a terrible employer, overly demanding? No, because he knew that every time he would walk by that house, every time he would drive by that house, his first thought would be about that job that wasn't done well, that wasn't done right. All of the rest of the beauty would be hidden because of his knowledge of that place where they hadn't done their best work. Every time Jesus would see a stone, and there were a lot of stones, Jesus would have remembered he'd made a short-sighted, selfish choice. So if Jesus wasn't famished enough to turn stones into bread, maybe he could be tempted by fame. Imagine the fame had Jesus jump from the temple heights only to be caught in the hands of angels. Can you even imagine how his fame would spread? A little like Evel Knievel jumping a motorcycle across the Snake River Gorge. Jesus would have made a huge splash. From Rome to Alexandria, everyone would have been talking about it. Everyone would be trying to think of an even higher place for him to jump from. Snake River done, let's try the Grand Canyon. Later, he would walk on water. So why not jump now? Why not do this small thing? What's wrong with a little fame, a little notoriety? Wouldn't that have gotten his ministry off to a flying start? Wouldn't people have rushed to him to see him, hoping that he would jump again right before their very eyes? But every time Jesus would have seen the temple, the first thing he would have thought of was the jump. Not prayer, not sacrifice, not teaching, not worship, not the home of Almighty God. He would have thought of the jump. He would have been Jesus the jumper, not Jesus the Christ. So when food and fame were not enough to entice Jesus, the prosecuting attorney, the devil, turned to fortune, to money, to possessions. It's always good, isn't it, to save the biggie, the best, for last? Looking out over all the world which could be seen there on the top of his wilderness mountain, Jesus is offered the possession of all the lands that he could see. There's a place just outside my hometown where on a clear day you can see 4 states. But I'm not sure Minnesota, Iowa, South Dakota, and Nebraska would be much of a temptation. If Satan kept the best for last, he also saved the biggest lie for last. What he was offering was not his to offer. Wherever they looked and whatever they saw was under the control of the Roman Empire. Still, the temptation must have been great. What could Jesus do for the people? If he was the emperor, if he was the king, he could improve the life of each and every person. The hungry could be fed, the naked could be clothed, widows and orphans could be cared for, prisons could be emptied. Think of what Jesus could have done for the ones he had often referred to as the least of these, if only he had given in to the temptation. Jesus came proclaiming that the reign of Christ, that the reign of God, that the kingdom of heaven had come near. Jesus could have made it happen right then at that moment had he given in to temptation. Instead of announcing that it was near, he could have announced that it was here. Fred Craddock, blessed of memory, has said that it's not a temptation unless it will actually be beneficial. It's not a temptation unless there can be a strong argument for the benefits which will come from the wrong choice. In fact, the greatest temptation is when the benefits appear greater with the wrong choice than the benefits with the right choice. In the end of our temptation story, there really is just one temptation, the same temptation that we face each and every day. It is the temptation of idolatry, but not the idolatry of worshiping the devil, rather the idolatry of worshiping ourselves, of putting ourselves in the place of God, of making our desires more important than anything else, more important than anyone else. We often hear it called looking out for number one. It would be better to call it lying to ourselves, rationalizing, and lying to those around us. When we look around our world these days, we see this same temptation played out again and again. Politicians looking for their campaign money, college coaches looking for their next contract, clergy looking for their next pulpit, lobbyists looking out for their business, billionaires looking out to become trillionaires. All of them worshiping the idols, the idol that they say is greater than God and that is more important to everyone else. And as we see it in ourselves, and we do see it in ourselves, when we choose to ignore the impact of our decision on our worldwide neighborhood, on this wonderful creation that we've been given the glorious task of caring for. Whenever we say that we deserve what we have, or vice versa, we say they deserve what they got. We see it when we don't even consider the impact of our decisions on others and on ourselves. Idolatry. It's the only sin. Everything else that we call a sin is because we have put ourselves and what we think are our needs or our desires in front of God. We worship things instead of worshiping the one who is the creator, the redeemer, and the sustainer of all that is. Do you remember how this story began? Matthew says, it was a dark and stormy night. No, that's not what Matthew said. But that's the way people say, a good first sentence is important if you want people to, get engaged. Matthew says, the Spirit led Jesus. We should know how this is going to turn out before we go any further at all. The Spirit led Jesus. And whatever comes after that doesn't matter because Jesus is following the Spirit. I can't help but wonder where the Spirit is leading you, where the Spirit is leading me, where the Spirit is leading us as a church. I can't help but wonder how we will respond. Can we see how the decisions we make here, the choices we make, how they impact beyond these walls? Are we willing to make hard decisions? The decisions that are selfless instead of selfish. The issue is not if we will be tempted. Friends, we are tempted every day. We are tempted every day. And it doesn't really matter if we're talking about food or fame or fortune because we're really talking about idolatry. How do we avoid idolatry? We allow ourselves to be led by the Spirit. And we even follow the Spirit into the wilderness. I could have chosen the song where he leads me, I will follow, I'll go with him all the way. I chose instead to have us sing Spirit song. I like the way that it describes what it is to be in God's love and to follow God's Spirit as individuals and also following God's Spirit wherever God leads this church. Will you stand with me as we sing?